Good luck to all of us. And I'm not going to introduce our panelists at length, but can I just say that, Alex, you've just been elected as president of Finland. You've come to us a couple of days after the election. Congratulations from all of us. And even more importantly, congratulations too, and thanks for your dedication. You didn't only speak at the opening lunch, you're also one of those presidents who stays for the entire 3 days. And for all of you now watching from home, presidents who've left early, please follow this example.
But I'm not president yet. I have all the time in the world. So,
so are you going to do it differently next time?
No, I'll be here. Yeah.
But no pressure. But let's look at the 120th Munich Security Conference with a title of hopefully peacefulness, warlessness, or whatever other title the policy team at that time will come up with. There will be many forks on the roads. Can you pick out a few?
Yeah, sure. I think my job is basically to try to frame the big picture. I think it's always good to go back. I think this is our 1918, 1945, 1989 moment of our generation. In 1918, in the aftermath of World War I, the League of Nations was a nice idea, but it failed. After World War II, the United Nations, for all intents and purposes, succeeded in maintaining peace, at least avoiding World War III. And then in 1989, many of us got a little bit lazy. We thought that all 200 nation states of the world would revert to some form of combination of liberal democracy, market economy, and globalization. But now, as of 2022, especially us in Europe, realized that that's not going to be the case. And then we come to an analysis of what the world is like right now. And I think for the next 10 years, we will live in an age of unpeace, where international rules and institutions will be continued to be challenged. We will live in an age of unrest, where there'll be a lot of conflicts popping up left and right. And I think the big, if not a battlefield, at least spheres of interest is going to be between the global West, which tries to protect the current system, global East, China, Russia, which tries to challenge it, and the global South, which will have a big role in deciding in the way in which it goes. Because the global South, in its broadest sense, wants to have agency in the system. And I'll finish off by saying that I think, as always, we pretty much have three options going for the next 60 years. One is competition. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's market-based competition, but right now, it's a little bit complicated. The second option is conflict, and the problem, of course, is that competition can easily spill over into conflict unless you have the third option, which is cooperation. So I think the job of the Munich Security Conference, the international community in general, is to understand that this is one of these big moments in the history of international relations where there's going to be a shift of power between these three spheres, the global West, the global East, and the global South. And the thing is that sometimes I feel that we, especially in the West, have a tendency to take the moral high ground. In other words, we make a claim that we will cooperate with those who agree with us. But the problem here is that all the global problems, like climate change, technology, pandemics, or demographics, they're global problems and have to be solved on a global level. So I hope that in 60 years from now, we will be there, with a new international system. But we have about 10 years to try to fix the current one, and I think that will then last us for the next 50 years. That's a quick summary.
Thank you. You mentioned the Global East, a region where cooperation, conflict, and competition are as close together currently as possible. Let's turn to a wonderful Munich young leader, Lynn, who has just left IISS and is transitioning to a new role in the US, and you'll hear of her, I'm pretty sure, very soon on it. Looking at the Global East, Lynn, where is the next fork in the road and what's coming thereafter?
Thank you, Benedict, and hello, everyone. Just to make clear that I'm not a current Munich Young Leader. I was a Munich Young Leader in 2013, so that was some time
Once
ago.
Munich Young Leader, always Munich Young Leader.
My favorite club then, thank you. Look, I think, we talked about how we wouldn't predict into the future and how that was impossible, and certainly that is the case. But I think it's useful nonetheless to kind of look forward to define multiple possible futures, the good, the bad, and the truly catastrophic, as a means by which we can, seek to work towards the good and avoid the bad and actually give the catastrophic a wide berth. So I think this exercise is important. It's not easy, of course, because if we look back 60 years, we see a world that's very different. So it's likely that the next 60 years would be quite different. So if we look back 60 years, where were we? We had, in 1964, narrowly averted a nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Vietnam War was raging. The US-China rapprochement was still about a decade away. And at that point, the Cold War seemed interminable. Fortunately, that did come to an end, though I think we've stumbled willy-nilly into another one. So, looking back, it was a different world back then. And now looking forwards, I think what we need to look at in terms of forks in the road is one important thing, as Benedict highlighted, is the security situation in Asia. And the US-China relationship has been described by some, and I think I agree, as one of the most consequential relationships in the world for several reasons. First, it impacts war and peace, so it's an existential issue. Second, it's going to have implications for the balance of power in the region and globally as well. And third, it impacts the rules, if any, governing international behavior. So whether or not the rule of law is going to govern behavior between states, that's going to be impacted by how the US-China relationship plays out. And finally, of course, as was highlighted earlier, the international community's ability to manage global challenges is going to be impacted by the US-China relationship. And if we look at that relationship, I think the question at the forefront of many of our minds is there going to be war? And of course, sadly, there are several pathways towards that. We all know about Taiwan, although I think probably the concerns over that in the near term about a war breaking out over Taiwan in the near term are, overblown a little bit. But there are also other pathways to potential war between the US and China. Incidents at sea and air in the South China Sea. In 2001, the US and China, there was a collision in the air between the United States and China. In that case, war was avoided. But obviously the tensions right now between the two countries are far stronger, so far more problematic. So there is an issue there as well. And finally, and although this is not often talked about, we have, of course, the possibility that the United States might be drawn into a war with China over the incidents between China and a US ally like the Philippines. So in the South China Sea, there have been relatively minor skirmishes between China and the Philippines, and probably that hasn't received that much attention here in the world. But that could easily bring the United States into conflict with China. And short of war, we are also very worried, of course, about the balance of power in Asia, and because that's going to have implications moving forwards. But from the regional perspective, from Asia's perspective, I think much of Asia is less concerned about who comes out on top. That's different, I think, from the western part of the world, but many countries in Asia are less concerned about who's the dominant power in the region. I think what's more important is whether or not that dominant power actually adheres to the rule of law in its relations with the big powers, but also the small powers. And I think that's essential. So if we talk about forks in the road, we are looking at war, peace, and we are looking at whether or not the dominant power in any relationship actually decides to follow the rule of law. So I think I would look out for those litmus tests moving forward.
Perfect, thank you, Lynn. And you mentioned the need to make international organizations fit for purpose. Turning to South Africa and to you, Emma, Member of Parliament, Shadow Minister for International Relations and Cooperation, on the road to more efficient and fair international organizations, from your African point of view, where are the forks?
Well, Benedict, thank you. So it's my hope that by 2084, we will see more globally representative international institutions where the Global South, and specifically the African continent, have got a seat at the table. If we look at where the African continent is at the moment, we know that it has the youngest population in the world. It is home to 20% of the world's population. It has vast natural, mineral, biological resources that are yet untapped. And unfortunately, at the present juncture, it is the site of proxy wars between global powers. And we're, of course, seeing that it is fertile ground for these international conflicts to gain further traction. So for me, I would like to see that the Global South and Africa in specific has got a seat at the decision-making tables at the United Nations in whatever incarnation that takes by 2084. I'm sure that it will look vastly different from a technological and an artificial intelligence perspective. And then, of course, if we look at the Bretton Woods institutions, we need to find a way to make the terms of lending more attractive to African nations and more competitive, because I think at the moment we risk losing vast tracts of our developed infrastructure, highways and our ports to neo-colonial ambitions if we don't reform the Bretton Woods institutions that align with our values of peace, democracy, freedom, tolerance, to essentially make it more competitive for the developing world to take up those offers, as opposed to offers from more malign actors. And so I think that essentially it's a fork in the road, this juncture. It's potentially a pathway towards a dystopian future or a utopian future. And I think that it's important that those of us that are in the arena don't take up space, but that we use our positions to work together to advance cooperation and to seek partnerships in terms of building a world that works for all of us and not just a select few.
Perfect, thank you. Turning from the Global South to the High North, thought is Gülfar Dottir is a long-standing friend of the Munich Security Conference. Every time she comes here, she has a new position. I checked this morning. She is still Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs of Iceland. What are your forks in the road? We talked about technology when we talked last. We talked about the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, whether we'll see Nairobi or Rio institutions in the future. Which forks to look out for?
Well, I think listening to three of them, it's a mix of those. I mean, we look at, like Alexander mentioned, when we look at the institutions that we have now, I would say that I'm a believer and a fighter for them, because the alternative is always, it's flawed, but it's the best we got. And I do not want to imagine a world without those institutions. And sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to allow yourself to criticize how they're developing and what, in my opinion, has to be fixed without feeding the wolf, because we also know that certain powers really do want to undermine these institutions, and you don't want to allow them to do that. But if we pretend that it's perfect as it is, and we're afraid to fix it, then we're also feeding the wolf. So I think the institutions that we have, they have to develop with the changes and the times. And we see, for example, if we look at the Russian war in Ukraine, I mean, this is old-fashioned war. This is as clear-cut as it can get. Still, I mean, I know, and I will mention, the unity and what we've done, and we're in this together, and all of that, which is important. But still, we have a system that is it's not working enough for this kind of dilemma. So if we have an old-fashioned war, and this is where we're at, how will we as individuals, as leaders, as institutions, how would we cope with a very different kind of crisis? That is, we have climate change, and we know we have already seen consequences, and they will only grow. And how will the international community deal with the fact that a big part of the world will stand up and they will move? Because that's what human creature does. We have demographic changes, which are extreme in the West. I mean, this is happening very, very fast. And here you have a problem, and you have a problem, and you know that by somehow finding a solution or having a vision on how they could assist each other with changes, that would be good. But that's something that is not talked about much, and we have a system. If we look at Europe, if we look at refugees, asylum seekers, I mean, this is a system that is not, it's not in a good place. Like there's no unity around that. So that's probably not the system that will fix it. But how will we do that? And then with AI, I'm a lawyer and a politician. I'm not an expert, but what I see is extremely fast development that I don't think many individuals in the world really can comprehend. And the effect that will have, because we know about all the opportunities, how it can, I mean, it might be the solution for us to all be 150 years old, but it also has huge challenges. And I asked AI, what kind of institutions would we need? And that was basically like a climate institution, and then some kind of a regulatory framework for AI. That's what AI tells us, but still we don't have it. And then my final point is, when we look at the whole world, it might sound weird, but for me, the answer lies in each and every individual. Because we know that the challenges that we face will not be solved without innovation. Innovation does not grow without freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom to be free to criticize, to be creative, to be very uncomfortable, to do mistakes. Innovation does not thrive in autocratic states. So we truly need to cherish the fundamental rights that we have, because only with them we will find the solution. And I know that we were told to be, I mean, we have to find the silver lining and have to be optimistic. And after those 3 days, I can say I'm both. I mean, I am sad somehow to feel how serious this is already and how we're still going in the wrong direction, and we know what it takes, but we're not really going fast enough to that place. But I'm also optimistic because I know that we have the solutions. We can solve it together, and I completely agree with the cooperation part. I mean, it should be obvious. That's obviously the way to go forward, and that will be in 60 years also. And I hope that in 60 years we will still have a conference here where we meet and look each other in the eye, because I think we're too afraid to be human beings, to talk like human beings, to front challenges as human beings, and we need to talk to each other more, not just scream something out and said, I took a stand, but you're not really asking for any reply or any discussion.
You get full points for mentioning the Munich rule. Yes. Engage with each other, don't lecture each other. We love it, and we'll print it up there next time. We've now spoken about a few forks in the road that we should and can take. We've certainly missed a few looking back, particularly when it comes to climate change. Mm-hmm. And Leila Ben Ali, the Minister of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development from the Kingdom of Morocco, just shared a pretty worrying statistic with me when we were behind the stage. And that is that by 2084, so at the 120th Munich Security Conference, there'll be a lot fewer countries around, because up to 20% of the UN membership, according to climate scientists, may have disappeared in the waves of oceans and in the deserts. And so, accepting that we've missed forks in the roads here, looking at how we are going to deal with that challenge of a changing composition of the UN, of a climate change that we will not be able to reverse or potentially even stop. Which forks in the road are most important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Benedict. I think when we were preparing for this panel, it was very obvious, and thanks to President-elect who put us in the perspective and reminded us of the time in history of 1918 and 1948. And I reflected on that a little bit more because I'm really hoping that between now and 2084, the multilateral system, of course, as countries of the Global South, we're always calling for the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions and development finance and the United Nations. But I just want to echo what my friend from South Africa was saying. Actually, I don't think it will matter 60 years from now. It probably won't matter because exactly what we were saying. I mean, you will have. I'm assuming that the multilateral system and the parallel systems that would have developed over time will have institutionalized the process of dealing with the migration of climate refugees, or the process of, in the case of Israel, there was a process of repatriation of refugees, except that in the meantime, between 10 and 25% of UN membership would have disappeared, and this raises questions that humanity has never faced in the past in this. So I'm just hoping that between now and then, our creativity in the multilateral system and parallel systems will have found at least the bureaucratic process to deal with it. Now, that means that when I was listening also to President-elect, he mentioned 4 key existential threats or challenges, climate being number 1, pandemics, of course, technology and artificial intelligence, and demographics. And indeed, I mean, if we look at these 4 challenges, and climate being the most ubiquitous, and I would say the responsibility is very diluted, and this is one of the key areas that we find as climate negotiators as the most difficult point to negotiate on, is the historic and current responsibility when it comes to the impact of climate on not only on countries or sovereignty, but also on paths of the economy, particularly if you want to carve out additional budgets for armament and defense, because we have much more imminent threats that are the wars that we are facing. So I also looked at a couple of numbers. GDP per capita in the last 60 years have been multiplied 25 times. And I'm relating this to climate because, I don't think we will have the same growth in terms of GDP per capita, and there will be a peak, and the growth will stall over time. That will mean that our living conditions will more or less will get close to each other. Our CO2 emissions per capita at some point will have to get close, whether we are countries of the Global South or the Global North or the Global East, and I'm assuming that countries of the Global South are still pushing for that. But the thing is that I think the adult generation in 2084, and I've been thinking about that, I was wondering how old my kids will be at the time. I think they will be content with similar living conditions as their parents, which means my children. My children will be the parents of the adults living at that time. And I think they will be content with the same living conditions as their parents, which is not my case. Because as long as we provide some additional importance to values like identity, humanity, environment protection, it will be very important for us, especially if we are having 2 or 3 degrees Celsius higher. I mean, Morocco has breached the record of 1.5 degrees last year, actually. So 1.5 degrees Celsius is not, by 2050, is a reality for many countries today. And I think the way we also apprehend technology and the efficient use of technology, artificial intelligence, in dealing with those existential threats, including climate, I'm really hoping that we will be much more efficient in deploying finance, capital, and technology to deal with that, so that we produce better. We will be obliged to produce better, but to consume better as well.
Thank you.
Hannah Notte from the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. It was mentioned on the panel 60 years ago we had just lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Today, Russia's war against Ukraine has brought renewed attention to nuclear weapons, and different countries around the world are asking themselves whether they need their own nuclear weapons in order to be safe, including here in Europe. My question to you is, what should happen as a matter of urgent priority today in order for us to avoid living in a world in 60 years where we have far more nuclear weapons than today?
Thank you, Anna. Would you like to take that?
Sure. I mean, if you look at the sort of 5 front lines of battle nowadays, you have the sea, the air, land, then cyber, and space. They are the key. But all of these are, in one way or another, linked to the question of nuclear non-proliferation. And I think as a matter of urgency, there's a START agreement which runs out in 2026. I'm actually quite hopeful that a dialogue between Russia, the United States, potentially China, and a few others will calm things down. Why am I optimistic? Because do you remember in the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Putin started to use language about and threatening with nuclear weapons? Who basically asked him to be quiet? 2 sources. One was China, and the other one was the Global South. So there is an understanding that anything that has to do with nuclear weapons, whether tactical or strategic, is existential for all of us. I'll finish off by saying, having said all of that, I'm quite sort of confident, optimistic that we'll sell. But the big worry that I have right now is space, because that's completely uncharted territory. And we can have simulated war games about what's going on in space, et cetera, but once we start going in that direction, then that will have an impact on land, sea, and air, and cyber. So I'd be focusing a lot on space right now.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've seen a question from a Ukrainian friend over here.
Thanks a lot. Lisa Yasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. When I hear all the conversations here, and you just said that we are all around 1938, 39, and next 10 years we are going to live in this or that. Does it mean that there is no hope that we can stop it? That there is no way that we can stop new wars, new security threats? But I think it's the place where we actually have to work on all the solutions that we have to stop it. I'm very worried when we compare this time to the time before the Second World War. But let's make it possible that it's not the same, please.
Who wants to take this one?
I think what you said about ensuring that the future doesn't look like the worst of our past is so important. And I think that's why I think the calls that I've heard for unity around the issue of Ukraine and for a cohesive response to the issue is so important. And I think this part of the world, perhaps because of its geographical proximity, but also mostly because of its geographical proximity, but also because of an understanding of what it means for the rule of law, gets it. In Asia, I think, unfortunately, there is a sense that the Ukraine war, for instance, impacts Asia because of its impact on food and energy supplies and prices, but that apart from potential implications for Taiwan, that there are less geopolitical implications of the Ukraine war for Asia. However, I think it does impact, the rule of law, first of all, the Russia-China nexus and what that means for the region. It also impacts the ease by which countries can form alliances and partnerships. It just complicates all of that. And also it impacts how Europe, how much engagement we can see from Europe in the Indo-Pacific or Asian region. So I think we need to realize as an international community that problems, especially problems as big as this, are not isolated or isolated to a particular region. And so just as the impact of the war in Ukraine impacts Asia, and Asia's developments also impact Europe. So I would like to see a far more cohesive international community. And so I would like to see on my end also a far more firm response from lots of Asian countries in terms of how they stand up to defend and promote the rule of law.
Speaking of responses, you're going to get 3 for the price of 1, because I think Alexander thought is 4 for the price of 1.
Just let me give you a much more optimistic view. I mean, we human beings have a tendency to make 3 mistakes. 1, we over-rationalize the past. So we look at examples from the past and think that things happen a certain way. Second, we over-dramatize the present. We always believe that we live in the most dramatic times in the history of mankind. But the most serious one that we make is that then we underestimate the future. And in my mind, I think the glass was very much half full in this panel. We were looking at concrete solutions of, how to get out of the war in Ukraine. This whole Munich Security Conference has been about how do we deal with the Middle East? How do we deal with the elections in the United States? And it's been very result-oriented. And that's why I give you an optimistic view. Never underestimate the capacity of humans to find solutions to complicated problems.
Thoughts?
Well, my point was very similar to what Alexander mentioned, because this question is so understandable. And I have to remind myself quite often that when you get kind of worried and almost sad when you see the signs, and you're like, this is not that time. This is a different time. This is a different world. This is a lot of things have happened since then. These are very different dynamics. It's just not the same. So you have to learn from history and not repeat the mistakes. But you should not make the mistake to think that somehow the history just repeats itself. I mean, we have the pen in our hand. It is literally up to us to prevent that from happening. And I believe we can. But it's just a matter of do we have the will? Are we creative enough to cooperate in a different manner than we maybe did in the past? So I know we can. But what worries me sometimes is that I don't see enough creative thinking, and that's also why when I mentioned the leaders talking more direct, unscripted, and the institutions, it's not about the institution. Just like NATO isn't about weapons, the EU isn't only about political integration. The EEA agreement is not only about business. It's mentioned in all of these institutions and agreements, the values that we share for us to, have a prosperous life. And that's what it's all about. And maybe we have to remind ourselves that we can do it, and we have to let the institution develop and remind the institutions that it's not about them, it's about the values.
Thank you. Emma and then Leila, 30 seconds each, please.
Thank you. I'm often reminded that we need to be pragmatic and practical in finding solutions to our most challenging problems and not getting weighted down in the complexities of things. And for me, I think that if we act now, a new form of multilateralism is possible, but that requires us to move beyond our echo chambers and start having conversations with one another. And from a practical perspective, as somebody from the Global South, something that can be done to bolster democracy, freedom, the values that everybody here in this room stands for, and to guard against a more fragmented future, is an investment into civic education. I'm often asked by ambassadors of European and Western nations what can be done. And one of the things that can be done by everybody in this room is in the Global South, investing into civic education, making the link between who you vote for and the system that governs your nation, and how that feeds into the future that we're creating. So my encouragement and my request to everybody in this room here is to reach out beyond your echo chamber and take our hands in the Global South, because I think a bright future is indeed possible.
Perfect. Leila, last words of wisdom.
2 points. First one, how to stop the wars. I mean, there's a concept that we lost, I believe, by the turn of this century, which is strategic deterrence. And it was very important in the 20th century to build our nuclear industry, right? That's the first point. So strategic deterrence, in a way, a concept that I'm hoping we will get back to and will become in vogue again after the series of wars and crises that we had since the beginning of this century. Second point, I'm also hoping that conflict, I mean, the 2 major wars with global implications that we had over the last 2 years, Russia-Ukraine and Gaza-Israel, are mostly war of territories. I'm really hoping that we'll find a way to move to space as well, because I'm assuming these wars will not be as lethal as the wars having in space. But the thing is, if we can have more directed energy weapons in space, that might be a way to avoid traditional wars like we are having now. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now reached the most silver of linings, namely the end of this panel and the concluding remarks of our chairman. But before I hand over to you, Christoph, let me just thank our 5 wonderful panelists. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining us. Come back often, especially as president, from Friday till Sunday, 1800.